Good morning, everybody. So I'm a programmer, I'm a developer, and at my first company, I kind of accidentally fell into the sales role. So I'd never been to a business meeting before, I'd never done a sales pitch, and suddenly I was meeting with big companies like Sony and MTV and trying to get them to buy our startup's product. And it was really hard. It was hard to learn what they cared about, and it was hard to do the sales. And it took me a long time to figure out what I was doing wrong. There's so many ways to go into a sales or just a meeting where you're trying to get feedback from a customer and actually get nothing of value out from it. And so I just wanted to give you kind of, eventually it clicked and we started being able to close these deals. And it was simple, but it was a little bit counterintuitive. So I just wanted to walk you through some of that. And there's this phrase, customer development, that you've probably heard everywhere. You know, everyone's saying you've got to be outside the building, you have to be talking to your customers. And really, like, the point of this is that we don't want to build our whole product and our whole business and then find out if people are going to buy it. It would be nice if we could find out if people are going to buy it and then kind of build what they want. And unfortunately, we can't get perfect information like that. So we're just trying to get as much as we can in advance. The more certainty you can get up front, that when you launch, you're going to have customers who are going to pay you, is like, it just makes a world of difference. And in some ways, this is common sense. Like, I talked to kind of these traditional business guys, and they're sort of saying, wow, you startup people, you're actually launching businesses before you have customers? That's crazy. Like, why would you ever do that? And it's kind of the long way background to common sense. Like Paul Graham, pretty much everyone who thinks about this stuff, like Paul Graham's version is that until you've launched, until the product is out there and in people's hands, the only two things you're allowed to do is write code and talk to customers. Like everything else, the business cards, the logos, all this stuff, it's like, it's overhead. And once the product's out there, like, you're just shocked. You're like, wow, everyone hates it. Or you go, whoa, everyone ignores like 90% of it, but this bit they really love. We didn't see that coming. And that's when the process can really begin. And the reason this is worth doing, even though it takes quite a bit of time, is because if you're starting an agency or a lot of businesses, there may be like the flat lines. They start generating cash relatively quickly, but they only scale so far. Whereas if you're starting a technology startup, it's more like the ski slope line. You start out and you're just losing money, you know, potentially for years. You have no product that's finished. You have to build all this tech. You have to get all these customers. There's so much work to do. But once you get the foundations right, it can scale forever. You know, Facebook's biggest problem in some ways is that they're running out of people in the world. They're like, Facebook's next ad campaign is going to be like, have more children. And if we get it right, this is why they're so attractive to investors. This is why they're so powerful for social causes. It's because you get those foundations right. They really, really work. But it's hard to get the foundations right. It's so hard to build something people want. And if you look at the way that the big dot-com failures from the first dot-com crash around 2000 happened, they were kind of a textbook example of what not to do. This is my favorite. This is the Pets.com mascot. And over their lifetime, they spent $300 million to build a website that sells pet food, which is a lot, I think. And they could have done it for less, and it didn't work, and they went out of business. And you can imagine them saying at the end of that, like, ooh, I wish we'd known some of these things sooner. And the goal of talking to customers, ideally before we even have the product finished, is just we want to start learning stuff in advance. We want to start learning it sooner. So you don't go, like, 6 months down the line and go, we could have learned that 6 months ago. And we need a way to look, because if you just go into the meetings and you start talking about your idea, you don't actually get the information you want. It's a great way to learn. It just goes so wrong, especially if you don't have your product yet. You're trying to learn if your business is going to work really early, when you first have the idea, or when it's still in development. And you go into a meeting, and someone's like, so what are you doing? And you go, well, here's my idea. And they go, oh, it sounds great. I really like it. And you go, well, okay. Are you going to buy it? And they're like, well, it doesn't really exist yet. And so you leave, and what do you do with that feedback? They said they kind of liked it, but are they a customer? Like, are you going to bet the next 6 or 12 months of your life on that feedback? It's kind of fluffy. And so how do we get to the real information? And if we get these compliments and we believe them, they go, oh, that guy really liked my idea. Cool, I'm going to spend my life savings on it. it's sort of, that's risky, right? Like, is it good data or is it bad data? And if we bring that back to our team, it's like now all of us are running in the wrong direction. So we want to avoid these false positives and not get in too much trouble. And there's really two main types of bad data that we get out of these conversations. The first and the most problematic is compliments. If you come to me, you go, Rob, I have an awesome idea, and you tell it to me, I'm going to go, oh, that sounds really good. Like, is your startup now better? Or, like, there's no data in that, right? And if you start thinking about it, you'll realize that 90% of the conversations that you have, sales meetings, investor meetings, they actually end with a compliment. You pitch your idea to an investor, the investor goes, oh, that sounds really cool. Keep me in the loop. And you go, yeah, he really liked it. But is that, like, that's not money in the bank. There's a big gap there still. And this just, like, clearly, if you think about it, a compliment is not a good sign. But still, so much of what we do in these conversations is based around trying to get a compliment. You meet someone at an event, you go, yeah, this is what my startup does. It does this and this and this and this and this. And they go, oh, that's awesome. This is what my startup does. And you've both just given each other compliments, and there was no chance to actually get real feedback or to kind of move the business relationship forward. So this sort of sounds great. I love it. It's so common. And even if someone's being honest, right? Let's say you meet someone and they literally do love it. It's their favorite idea they've ever heard. They love it so much. How do you value that feedback? Because even venture capitalists, they're professional judges of the future, and they're wrong 4 times out of 5. So if even the best in the world are wrong most of the time, like, how seriously can you take anyone's opinion? Like, it's nice that they like it, but it doesn't mean it's going to be successful. And the fact that they don't like it doesn't mean it's going to be a failure. So there's some real information under that. The most common way a meeting ends is this. And if you break it down, it's a compliment plus a stalling tactic. It goes, I really like it, don't call me. You know, it's like a great way to get out of conversations. It's non-committal, it's kind of polite, and it's absolutely worthless to you as feedback. And all we could do, they always come, the compliments always come, so we just ignore them. Just remember that whenever you hear a compliment, just stay on alert, and just the compliments aren't data. If you finish a meeting and you go, yeah, they really liked it, that probably wasn't a very useful meeting. There's got to be something more in there, right? The other big one that's not useful is what I call fluff. And fluff is kind of any generic claim or promise about the future. If you talk to a customer or anyone, and let's say you pitch your idea, and the customer goes, oh yeah, we would definitely use something like this. We would, like, in the future. There's no money trading hands. That's an easy promise to make. Like, how many times have you told yourself, yes, this year I'm definitely going to join a gym and I'm going to get healthy? It's like these promises about the future are so easy to make, and everyone's overly optimistic when they're in that situation. So I just ignore anything generic. And I try to, anytime someone goes, you know, oh yeah, I always do this, I usually do this. Let's say I'm building an email management tool. Someone goes, oh, I always handle my email perfect. I'm always at inbox 0. I'm great. I don't have an email problem. You look for a specific example. You go, well, when's the last time you did have a problem? And they go, oh, when I was on vacation, the hotel didn't have internet. I couldn't get to my email for a week. When I came back, it was a disaster. It took forever to recover from it. So it's like, aha. So your email's always perfect, except when it totally breaks apart. And they go, yeah, I guess that's true. And we can get, with the specific examples, we can get to it. In the user experience community, they like actually watching people do these tasks. But getting someone to talk you through it, can you talk me through how you deal with your email every day? You can get a lot of information out of this. If someone says what they would do in the future, you know, again, like, dig into it. Oh yeah, I'll definitely join a gym this year. It's like, kind of talk me through the last time you made that promise. Like, what happened the last time you went to a gym? You can figure out people's decision-making process. If someone goes, I might, I could, I will, it's like, can we just do it now? It's like, yeah, oh yeah, we would definitely use that. Can you put down a deposit? You can start getting people into the concretes, and you get really, really good information. And we get this bad data. Partly, it's destined to happen, but we also bring it on ourselves. And the dynamic that's at fault here, and it's really common, is that when we talk about our startup, when we tell someone what we're doing, and this is true in the context of bigger businesses as well. I see this all the time in partnership meetings and sales meetings. We tell someone about the idea, and we feel like we're getting feedback, we're being scientific. But actually, we're just kind of looking for compliments. We're saying, look how great my idea is, don't you like it? And people go, yeah, I really like it. And we go, good. And nothing really happens there. So I think that most of these, they just aren't useful conversations. And kind of as soon as you talk about your startup, it's such a personal thing that people try to protect your feelings. And specifically, there's a few other ways that you can get bad feedback. One of them is just being too formal about it. If you go into, let's say you're trying to learn if customers have a problem, and you go into that conversation and you've got a clipboard with 50 questions on it, like nothing useful is going to come out of that. It's too structured already. Or you're paying people to come in so that to give you feedback on your idea. And I just think this is really rough. I like to do it as a really casual chat. You're talking to someone about something you both care about. And that's where the real learning comes from. So you don't need the business cards, a script, a formal meeting. You don't need to pay them. You don't need a ton of time. All you really need is to know what you want to learn and to have a conversation about their life. If you're trying to talk to, let's say that you need a big partner and you're a small startup, or you need a big distributor, you're building hardware and you need to get into the stores, you need the distribution channel. If you go in and you go, hey, here's my idea, isn't it great, don't you like it? They're going to go, yeah, definitely. And maybe they call you back, maybe they don't, but you don't know why that happened. Whereas if you go into that conversation and you go, listen, I'm a small startup, how do you guys decide when or when not to work with a small startup? Suddenly you're getting real information. But you're not just pitching your idea, you're asking about how they do business. You're asking about how they make their choices. You're asking about their life. And that's a critical difference. The more you're talking about your idea, the less information you're getting. And you can't figure out the right questions to ask unless you've thought them through a little bit in advance. So I always, in my head, I always keep the top 3 questions that I would like to ask if I met a customer, an investor, an industry expert, like a journalist. Journalists are often industry experts. And whenever I get the answer to one of those questions, I'll just add a new question to my list and take the old one away. So you've always got your top 3 questions in your head. And then when you meet someone perfect in an event, you don't have to go, oh my gosh, you're perfect. I could learn so much from you. Can we exchange business cards and get a coffee? You can just go, oh, hello, I had this question. And suddenly you've moved your company forward. The kind of consequence of this is that it's really, really hard to learn from customers that aren't in your life. If your customers are in a totally different part of the world or an industry that you have no access to, it's just so hard to build the right thing. At least this has been my experience. Whereas if it's someone that you see every day or that you have some opportunity to bump into, you can ask these questions really casually and learn a ton from them. The second one is exposing the ego. If I come to you and I go, I have an awesome idea for an app, don't you like it? Is there any chance I'm going to get real feedback there? Not really. It's hard. Or if I go, hey, I quit my job. I've been working on this secret project. Tell me what you really think. It's so people are like, oh, I don't want to break this poor guy's heart. So I'm gonna. What do I tell him? And people give us these fluffy answers, these little compliments for so many reasons, but ultimately, for our sake, it's just we can't trust it. We can't trust these opinions. So just think about anytime you're talking about your idea, you're actually sort of being like, hey, isn't this great? And you just don't get good information back. And the rule here is that we want to ask about their life, not our idea. And it was this came up yesterday, but in some ways, as a young company, the most valuable people you can be talking to are your customers. And it's really about getting inside their head. And it's so hard. You think you understand them. You think you know everything about their life. And when you try to put yourself inside their head, you just heard it, right? Startups' own websites can't accurately describe what they actually do. It's so hard to put ourselves in our customer's head and use their words. So we need to get that by asking about them. The last way we screw it up is by just pitching. You describe your idea to someone and they go, yeah, I don't think I would use it. And you go, no, you don't get it. And they were just about to give you feedback and you just clobbered it, They're about to be like, yeah, it doesn't have that integration I need. And they're like, no, you don't need that. And that might work in a sales meeting if you're just trying to push someone over the line. But if you're trying to learn what you should build in the first place, this is a great way to destroy the meeting. And so what we need to do is we need to think of compliments as the enemy. Anytime, you can always force someone to give you a compliment if you're annoying enough. And you don't have anything to gain by convincing them either, which is an important distinction. We feel that we have to win the conversation by convincing someone that they like our idea, right? It's like, you keep talking to them until they're like, you're right, it's brilliant, I just didn't see it earlier. But unless they're like just about to write you a check, there's very little you can gain there, and you lose a ton of useful feedback. I still do this all the time. It's so hard to avoid this because you get excited, right? And so when you get excited, you start pitching and you realize you've been talking for 5 minutes. You just go, whoops, sorry. Like, my bad, I got excited. Like, what were you telling me? And you go back to it, and it's that simple. And you just like saved a conversation. You can measure how useful a meeting was by how little you talked. And obviously, like, sometimes this goes wrong. But if you can guide it, and basically you're just like occasionally, guiding them with questions, but they're talking about their life, how they make purchasing decisions, the worst part of their workday, what's costing them money. This is a gold mine of information. So the less you can talk in these meetings, the better you're doing. And again, like, don't value the compliments. Anyone will say your idea is great if you're annoying about it. All this stuff, like, we get around it, and you learn to navigate through the bad data. Like, anything you could Google for, you should Google for. If you can Google for it, you don't need to be asking someone in a meeting, right? It's like, this is basic due diligence on LinkedIn to find out how their company works and what their company cares about. But it's also stuff like market trends. If you're going into a meeting to figure out which percentage of people use which tool, that's something that you could have gotten from an industry report, and that's way faster. And I like to boil all this down to what I call the mom test. And this is a weird name, I know, for something about sales meetings, but I think of it like this. Your mom is the most biased person in the world about your ideas. I guess it depends whether your mom is supportive or critical, but let's assume she's supportive. And everything you do, she thinks is great. You go, Mom, I have an idea. And she goes, oh, I love it. You're brilliant. This is the best idea ever. You're so smart. And so our mom's really biased, right? So our mom's feedback is not useful because she loves everything we do categorically. And so if I go to my mom and I go, Mom, I have an idea for an app. And she goes, oh, tell me about it. Like, I love it already. And I go, okay, so you have an iPad, right? And she goes, yeah, I have an iPad. And I go, okay, it's going to be a cookbook on the iPad, and it's going to have videos of all your favorite chefs, and you're going to be able to share recipes, and there's going to be a shopping list which goes onto your phone that you can take into the store. And she's like, oh, yeah, that's great. And I go, and get this, it's only 20 euros, which is cheaper than the cookbooks on your shelf. And she goes, oh, yeah, that seems really fair. That's a good idea. We're like, awesome. And so we leave, and we spend all our money, and we build this app, and no one buys it, not even our mom, and we're sad. And if we think about that compliment, it's because we spent the entire, if we think about that conversation, we can realize that we spent the entire conversation talking about our idea, and we never actually talked about our mom's life. Whereas if we go back into that conversation, and we don't mention our idea at all, we get a very different result. We go, hey, Mom, you've got an iPad. How's it going? And she goes, oh, yeah, I love it. I use it all the time. We go, which apps do you use? She goes, oh, Angry Birds, Sudoku, Forbes. We go, oh, do you use any paid apps? And she goes, no, I don't trust those. And we go, okay, well, how did you find out about the apps that you do use? She goes, oh, well, in the newspaper on Sundays, they do an app of the week, and I just download it. They've been great. And we go, okay. So at this point in the conversation, we know that, like, this customer segment, or like at least if we assume that our mom is representative, they're nervous about putting their credit card details into the iPad. Maybe fair, maybe not, but we have to deal with the realities of our customers' worldview. They don't search the App Store, so how are they going to find our app? So we can't just trust that we can put it on the App Store and they're just going to search for it. But we've also learned that newspaper PR, like newspaper publicity, might be a great way to get in front of them. So we go, okay, so we can bank that learning. That's good learning for us. And maybe we change the topic. We go, hey, those books, I never see you use those cookbooks. Like, why do you still have them? She goes, oh, I don't need them anymore. Like, I know all my recipes already. It's like, I know what I like to eat. We go, well, when's the last time you did buy a cookbook? So we look for a specific example. She goes, oh, actually, now that you mention it, I got a new one over Christmas. I was trying to learn vegetarian cooking. And I'd never cooked vegetarian before, so I needed some recipes. And we go, okay, so maybe they don't need generic recipes, but the specific ones, like different types of ethnic foods, different dietary recipes, that could actually be great. So we know we can leave out all the generic stuff and specialize. So we go, okay, well, thank you very much, and we go on our way. So from that conversation, we learned a ton. Like we learned about publicity and promotional channel. We learned about some of the customer's concerns about payments. We learned about which content to include, which not. This is awesome learning, and we got all of it without ever mentioning our idea. And I think that the reason we got it is because we didn't mention our idea. Because as soon as you mention what you're working on, people start trying to protect your feelings. And as your company gets later stage, of course you have to mention it. No one's going to buy something without knowing what it is. But in the early days, when you're just trying to figure out if people care, you can leave all this stuff out of the conversation. So if we go in and we go, do you think this is a good idea? Obviously that's a bad question, right? We're totally biasing them. If we go, would you buy a product which solved this problem? Good question, bad question? Bad, yeah. It's bad because it's about our product. We've already said, like, we've set the stage. Like, I have a product. It's going to solve your problem. Aren't I great? Would you give me money? How do you currently deal with the problem? Is a much better version of the same question. Because now we're not mentioning our idea. We're talking about their life. And they're going to go, oh, it's a nightmare. It costs me so much time and money. It's the worst part of my day. Or they're going to go, actually, it's not that big of a deal. And we already know, like, how urgent the problem is and whether they're going to pay us. Talk me through the last time you had it is another great version. How much would you pay for this? It tends not to be very good because it's about us again. Whereas a good version is, how much does this cost you? Because that's about them. And people aren't always honest about money. Like, you don't get perfect information from any of this. There's still lots of ways that you can get tricked. But this gives you a way better starting point. So the 3 rules that I kind of like collectively call the mom test is the first one is that you want to be talking about their life, not your idea. The second one is that you don't accept generics or fluff, and instead you talk about specifics in the past of their life. So you don't ask about what they would do in the future, you ask about what they've already done in the past. Because if I've never been to a gym, it's more likely that I'm going to continue not going to a gym than that I'm suddenly going to change my life. If I've never worked with a startup before as a distributor, it's unlikely that I'm going to suddenly work with a startup. So you want to get into the past. And the less you can talk, the better you're doing. This stuff is also useful across the board. Like when I was first fundraising for my first company, we had just this enormous failure of fundraising the first time we set out to do it. And we already had an advantage because we'd gone through Y Combinator, like everyone liked us. We had a ton, like a massive network of investors open to us. I must have gone to 100 pitches, and we got no funding out of it, which is bad. And the worst part was that we couldn't get better because we didn't know why we weren't succeeding. There was no feedback coming back from those meetings. I would go into the meetings and I would say, hey, here's my product. Look how great it is. It does this and this and this. And they go, oh yeah, that's very interesting. What about this? And I go, well, it does this. And then they're like, okay, great, nice to meet you. Like, we really like it. Keep us in the loop. And we'd leave. And I'd go back to my team and I'd go, yeah, it went really well. They really liked it. And weirdly, like, no money appeared. And we didn't know like what was going wrong because we'd opened with the pitch. Whereas if you approach that a bit differently, if you start and you're asking about them and you're not trying to just like kick down the door and impress everyone, and you're willing to just ask questions and let that conversation run a little bit, you learn so much more. And this is the way the best salespeople approach sales as well. You think, we watch these movies, right, about the hard selling whoever, and they come in and there's some bold pitch and there's a montage and all sorts of camera angles, and then bam, and a 6-figure check gets signed. But really, the best salespeople start with questions. They want to know what the person's, like, their situation are, what are the problems, what are the implications of those problems. And only after they have all that foundation, they can be like, aha, I see what you need. And then they can offer a product. And it's the right one, it's been phrased in the right way. So talking to people and being able to get good feedback, which is hard sometimes, because a lot of the time they don't care at all about what you're doing. And that's a difficult piece of information to get. But being able to ask this, I found is just one of the most important skills. For hiring as well. You think someone you're trying to pitch to them, yeah, you're going to get such great salary, and they don't care about salary, or you're going to be able to deal with really hard problems, and that's not what motivates them. So understanding what drives people, it's just such a generally applicable skill when you're starting new businesses. For me, it's been a total game changer. I wrote a book about it, which goes through a bunch more of the specifics, and I think it's awesome. So you should probably read it if you want to. And the experience for me was I was just going to so many meetings, and I just couldn't tell if I was making progress. You know, it's like sales meetings, investor meetings, trying to hire people, trying to partner. It was a huge debacle. And yeah, once we get down to the nitty gritty and you learn how to find out what people care about, then it all starts moving forward. So that's basically it. Thanks very much, and there's plenty of time for questions if any of you are dealing with sticky situations.
I have a question. You said that you should focus on the customers you already are in contact with. But what if you find yourself in a market that you're not in contact with and you have to get to them and it's really, really hard?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, how do you get started, right? And there's a couple ways. It depends a little bit what stage you're at. So if you're just coming up with the idea, you can choose a different idea that's easier. But if you're already started or you just love the idea, you don't always have that luxury. So my two favorite tricks, and are you selling to businesses or are you selling to consumers?
It's both, basically. I mean, we're selling to schools, so teachers like individuals, but also to school management.
Cool. So schools are great because you know where they are. And in some ways, you can just kind of walk in, which I guess do it carefully. But like a lot of these things, the way it works is eventually they start to like you and they start making introductions for you. But that happens later. But that's what we're looking for. It's a real nightmare to have to do cold calls and get like, you know, you're convinced that you're calling people, you're emailing them, you're like, trust me, let's talk. That's so hard. And so what you want is for them to like you and they're making the introductions. And that will happen eventually, but later. So the question is, how do we get up to that point? And in some ways, as ridiculous as it is, like you don't need a repeatable strategy because you only need a few people to like you before you're kind of in business. And all the schools know each other, and once you're in, you're kind of in. Like I was talking to a founder, and we were meeting in a cafe, and he was trying to build, it was you know, tools for cafes and restaurants and retail stores. And we were talking, and he's like, yeah, they're impossible to meet. I go in, I like try to tell them what I'm doing, I pitch the idea, and then no one will introduce me to their managers. I'm like, oh, well, you're doing it all wrong. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, have you talked to this cafe? He goes, no. So the waiter walked by, and I go, excuse me, could I talk to the manager? And the waiter's scared. He thinks he's going to get fired. I'm like, no. I just love the coffee. I want to ask about its history. And he goes, oh, yeah, that's great. So the manager comes out, and we talk about the coffee for a little bit. I'm like, by the way, I know this is weird. I'm trying to start this company. Maybe you can help. And he's like, you know, and that point is like, we're talking. And it was sort of based on a little bit of a white lie, true. But this isn't a repeatable strategy. We're not doing this forever. It's just like you have to get in the conversation somehow at the beginning. And then if they start to like you and they take you seriously and what you're doing is interesting, like then the warm introductions continue. In general, schools are notoriously hard. We were selling to big brands like MTV, Sony. Like they were just a nightmare to meet with, right? You can't just like email like whoever runs Sony and be like, hey, let's grab a coffee. I want to ask you something. And so what we did is we built an advisory board of people who were really serious, senior in the industry. And we had 5 advisors, and their entire job was to meet with me once a month for an hour and send emails. So we would meet for an hour, and they'd go, who do you want introductions to? And I go, do you know these people? Do you know these people? And they would send out warm intros that connected us. And for me, that totally filled the kind of the pipeline of learning, and then later it turned into sales. If you're going to small businesses or individuals, my favorite trick, and no one ever believes me on this, but it works so well, is you organize your own meetups for the industry. So you go, I'm having the school teachers meetup where we're going to talk about how we're like having problems with the kids or something relevant to your company, you know, and everyone shows up and they're talking about their problems. If you don't want to talk, you know, it can just be a casual meetup, or you can introduce another speaker. You can get everyone together and be like, here's our great speaker, thank you so much. And then you step back, and still everyone in the room is going to take you seriously just because you kind of organized it. So it's a great way to get in the door. But yeah, yeah. That's
Thanks.
all I got there.
Okay, here left.
Hello.
Hey.
A little bit different question about people. So we have a small company, 10 people basically, and we are also a startup on a new project that is kind of a spin-off. So the question goes, do you take the people you have in your first company and move them to the spin-off or not? What do you do? What is best practice? What would you recommend? Thank you.
Man, I have no idea. Does anyone know the answer to that? If you're spinning a company out of a bigger one, what do you do? I've seen a couple examples, like Twitch TV got spun out of Justin TV, and there's a company that got spun out of Songkick in London, and in both cases, one of the founders left the original company and became the new CEO of the spin-out company. And then they took some key employees, but they basically built a separate team. But yeah, I have no idea. I've never done that.
Yeah, Harop, what's your view on using tricks or psychology or stuff like that? You know, like NLP and I don't know, whatever of those tricks, either in the positive way, just to understand the people what they are, or you wanna use your style and just do it and you don't care and you think it's it's not cricket to do it this way.
Yeah. So I think I'm now a mediocre salesperson. I started as probably the world's worst salesperson ever. And I got up to mediocre. And so for me, and now on my team, there's other better salespeople. And for me, it's like I was never going to try to become the best salesperson, I guess. Where it's really useful to me is, and I'm also like a mediocre programmer. Like I can't write secure or scalable code, but I can build a first version of a product. And for me, and I think for all of you, like if you're uncomfortable with sales, it's really worth getting up to that basic level where you can function, because you can start learning what people care about. And I'm sure that like I know these incredible salespeople, and they use all this stuff. They use the tricks, they use the psychology. They've got like the whole frameworks behind it. For me, I just want to make sure that the company I'm building is kind of like building something that people want. And if that's true, then I know at some point like better salespeople than me will come in. So it's not something I rely on at all. For me, and again, this is just what I'm comfortable with. I try to be as honest as possible and put everything on the table. Like I go into these meetings and I go, hey, I don't have anything to sell you, which is true. I'm just trying to figure out how this industry works because I'm starting a business, which is true. I don't really even have the product figured out yet, but you could actually help me a ton because you know how all these parts work that I'm confused by. And I just sort of like put it all out there. And that's true. Like I'm not trying to trick them. I'm not trying to like suddenly upsell them. But often those relationships do later turn into sales, just because you start out and like the trust grows. But yeah, I don't know. That's me.
I'd just like to comment on the question before. So the question was, are there best practices of whether you take your team with you or not? From the experience I've had and people I've spoken with, met, I don't think there are any best practices. I think it totally depends on the founder and the team, and I've seen people that have gone into a new company or a new project and don't want to have anything to do with what happened before. Even if they had good relationships and good people, people have said, I want a clean start, I want to start totally from scratch and don't want to have any legacy baggage. And I've seen great companies and entrepreneurs that have completely taken their friends that they've built their first company with, got acquired by a bigger company and either taken them with them or maybe even called them back in after a few years of being apart to do a new project. So I think it absolutely depends on yourself and your partners and what you really want to do. I don't think there's any rule there.
Cool. That's a bonus learning. No, I actually think, you can extrapolate from that. Like, everyone's like, it's tempting to look for a really strict process that you can then roll out and repeat. But in a lot of this stuff, I think in some ways that's a false temptation. Because, yeah, every situation's different. I remember one of my projects, I was building tools for people who go to conferences a lot and like give presentations. It was social media tools for speakers. And when I was first forming up the idea, I was like, where do I meet speakers? This was before I was going to conferences. I was at a friend's engagement party, and we were on the roof, and I heard someone across the ceiling go, blah, 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 my talk in Tokyo next week. And I was like, speaker. So I was like, hello, like, let me introduce myself. Like, I heard you're giving a talk in Tokyo next week. Tell me more. And we had a great conversation. I learned a ton, and she ended up becoming my first like real user and evangelist for the product. And that's not repeatable. Like, I'm not going to tell you that the strategy is to go to your friends' engagement parties and like hope you run into a customer. But yeah, like these situations are always different. So it's like if you kind of know what you're looking for, you can keep your eye open for it and take advantage when serendipity strikes. So I think that's a good place to wrap it, and we can recover a few minutes of the schedule. So thanks a lot, guys. It's been a pleasure.